Well, hello everyone. We are back at GRMCA headquarters here in Atlanta for an interview with longtime industry veteran Roy Keck. Well, I've known Roy for many years. I've never really had the chance to hear his story. He has a very enviable reputation in the ready mix business, as far as I'm concerned, for being extremely knowledgeable and for being a very strong team player. That's what I've always heard about Roy Keck. So, Roy, we are glad to be with you today. We've just finished up, by the way, Roy and I and others, we were just here for a really good technical committee meeting, a good attendance, and we decided it would be a good time to get together and do this podcast. So, Roy, if you would just introduce yourself to our listeners. So just start with the basics. Who you are, where you grew up, and all of that.
Sure, I can do that, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. I've listened to, I believe, all of the interviews you've done, and we've gotten to know a lot of great people and a lot of some very good companies. So it's been that's a great project you've been working on, preserving the history of the industry in Georgia. But as far as me personally, born in Mobile, Alabama, and my mother's family there were farmers. So I was born there, and then the family moved to Columbus, Georgia. My mother wanted to work at Fort Benning.
Oh, okay.
And so she worked there 20 years. So that's where most, my early days were in Columbus. Attended Jordan High School. We had a great class. In fact, we just had a reunion there over the weekend. Some really wonderful people came out of my class. But there in Columbus, my mother was a single mom, divorced mom, and we lived with my grandparents. So and we had a big family. So I had several of my aunts and uncles that lived there until they moved away. But
let me ask you a quick question. You said Jordan High School,
mm-hmm.
And is that spelled Jordan?
Yes, it is. It's like Jordan, but it's Jordan. It's a family name.
Yes.
The textile family, and they donated the land for that school, and school was named after them. So yeah. And I just a side note, I always wondered who my real father was, and my daughter had gone on Ancestry.com, sent them a DNA sample, and she said, "Dad, we got all these relatives in North Carolina." And I said, "I don't know anything about it." She said, "Well, why don't you do your DNA?" So I did, and actually tracked down my real father. He turns out to be a Bronze Star winner in World War II, and I never knew him. He died in 1970 at the age of 47, massive heart attack. So I missed out on that, but did solve that mystery.
Yes.
Anyway, I, of course, graduated from high school, Jordan. I moved to Atlanta to attend Georgia Tech. And so my career plan was to learn about automotive design. And that's what I studied, mechanical engineering there. But at that time, the Vietnam War was going on. And so if you were in college, you had a student deferment. And a lot of my classmates from Jordan did go to Vietnam, but I missed that opportunity. I did, I don't know if you remember, in 1969, they had the draft lottery.
Yes.
And I had I believe in prayer. So I prayed for a high number. I got a number 361. and so I missed completely that experience. But anyway, I while I was I'll just give you how I got into the concrete business. It was completely by accident. As I said, I wanted to be an automotive engineer, but while I was in school, at the placement office, they had a bulletin board where they put part-time jobs up. It's sort of like today we do interns. Back then, that was the way you got into an industry. And there was a notice on the board about a job with a company called Williams Brothers, and they were down. They were in Atlanta, East Atlanta.
Now, what year would that have been? Just to be
that
clear,
was 1971, I believe, was
right?
1970.
Yeah.
And so I was just young and green. I didn't know anything about how concrete was made, but I was about to learn. And so the job was at the Glenwood plant. And I don't know if you know, but that's probably was the busiest plant. That was the downtown plant.
Yes.
And so the dispatcher there really had a tough job. They'd have to come in, 6 a.m. And back then, concrete was a much more structured day. It was Monday through Friday from like 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., 5 p.m. You didn't ship concrete after 4 o'clock. It was pretty neat. A lot of the projects, were union jobs. It was back when the union was strong.
Right.
But anyway, I drove down to the Glenwood plant, and I met a guy named Larry West. And Larry was the plant manager and the dispatcher. And Larry gave me a quick interview, and he said, "When could I start? Could I start today?" So I said, "Can I come back tomorrow?" And he said, "Yeah." And he was going to pay me $3.25 an hour, which was about 3 times the minimum. And then he was going to give me about 20 to 30 hours a week. So that was pretty good money for a college student. I really helped me out. I was also a dorm supervisor at school, and I got a little income from that. So that all helped me avoid that student debt problem. So Larry and I became good friends, and Larry had a side business. He did sign painting and things like that. He's making a lot of money doing that. So he left Williams Brothers at some point, and a guy named John Brett took his place. And then John hired Mark Probst, I found out later. Mark Probst and I have got some background where we've crossed paths.
Yes.
And Mark Probst took that job as a late man. And the late man was a very important job. And that's really a good way for companies to recruit talent, is to the part-time. If they can figure out how to incorporate some part-time work into their business. And I had many friends after that took that same job I had, so it was pretty neat. That was a great experience. I knew nothing about the concrete plant when I walked in, and here I am in this huge operation with all these trucks, and the drivers were really very helpful to me in the evening to help me understand. I had to wait until all the trucks got back in, and then if somebody on a job site needed a yard or two, I had to batch. I had to do it all, and I was pretty green.
Can take just a moment and describe how batching took place in the early 70s. What was
the batch computer took up one whole room. It was just a humongous piece of machinery. And for every mix, you had one of these IBM punch cards.
Wow.
Not one, I'm sorry. You had a set of punch cards.
Yeah.
And if they did half-yard increments. So for up to 10 yards, you had about 20 cards that were all in a bundle. You stick that punch card in the machine, pull a lever down, and it would lock in, hit the start button, and it would weigh everything up. And then when you got ready to discharge, you hit another button. So this is a very automated plant for
Yes.
that era.
Yes.
And I think that plant had that system for probably another 5-10 years, but eventually went to just a full small computer. But it was, pretty intimidating for somebody who knew nothing about concrete. I had to pull the right mix card out and then weigh the materials, and I knew nothing about concrete. I didn't know what moisture was. I didn't know about different cements and so forth. So yeah, and usually the drivers at that time, you had more experienced drivers working later, and the drivers are always pretty nice and helpful. I always appreciated that.
And this is before the CDL.
This was all you had to have was a state of Georgia commercial driver's license. And I don't remember when CDLs were started, but
I think it was 90s,
yeah,
mid 90s maybe.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that it really solved any problems, but we can assume it did because we had excellent driver training back then. We had somebody that oversaw, a guy named Johnny Phillips there at Williams Brothers, did all the driver training. So had really some good drivers. But I kind of skipped over. I wanted to mention my wife Cheryl.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to Georgia Tech, I also went to a church out in Decatur, and that's where I met Cheryl. And we dated while I was in college. She was a senior in high school when I met her, and then she went to Georgia State and got her degree in education. And we got married when I graduated from college, and then she had one more year to go. And then once she graduated, she started teaching in DeKalb County, and then we lived there in Decatur on Candler Road.
Oh yeah.
And so we lived there about a year, and then we moved to Lithonia, and then she taught in Rockdale County for a couple of years. We bought a house there in Conyers, and then she became a instructional lead teacher in Gwinnett. So that was back in first about 9 or 10 years of our marriage, and so I was at Williams Brothers during that time. When I graduated from college, I took a full-time job. Williams Brothers offered me a job. In fact, I spoke directly to Horace, and I had offers from Georgia Power and from Williams Brothers, and I chose to go the concrete route because I'd already worked in that industry, and I was very, very comfortable, enjoyed what I was doing, and
So what was when you finished up school and committed to that as your vocation? What was your initial role at that point when you were full time, if you will?
Yeah, the first full-time assignment I had was at the batching concrete at the Norcross plant, which was in the Vulcan Norcross quarry. So I got a lot of plant experience. That was plant number 6. I mentioned Glenwood was plant number 1.
Yeah.
And then, plant number 2. Chamblee was plant number 1. Chamblee was the original plant that Williams Brothers put up. They started in 1965 in the concrete business. And in fact, I didn't mention I worked one summer at Chamblee. And that was a high production plant.
Oh, I bet it was.
Oh, it was busy. And they had a lumber store right down the street from it. But very busy operation. I think they ran 20 or 25 trucks. It was huge. And the plants that Horace built had wide belts for aggregates. Trucks, the trucks were back then. The weight law enforcement was not that strict, and they were running up to 15-yard mixers.
No
No, they
kidding.
weren't.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, they were 10 to 15-yard mixers.
Never heard that.
Yeah, in fact, batching at Chambly one day, I wasn't watching what I was doing, and I put 12. I actually put 12 yards in a 10-yard truck, and it was running out the back. But Tony McClure was the dispatcher. I don't know if you ever met Tony.
No, I didn't.
But Tony was early on. Tony was a dispatcher. Eventually, Tony was put in charge of materials for the whole company, and Tony was a very knowledgeable guy. There was the plant maintenance man. There was a guy named Russell Center, and
as in
the Center family.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the father of all the centers that you see in the market.
Right.
And I think he had 7 sons. He had a huge family, and Russell had worked for Horace they had a sawmill in Nashville, Georgia.
Yeah.
And they shut that down, and Horace came up to Atlanta to run the concrete business. And Russell came with him, brought his family, and he had to respect him because he worked hard, and sometimes it was a dirty job when the fly ash would run over or something like that, but I had a lot of respect for Russell. And his oldest son's name Irvin, and I don't know if you ever met Irvin, but Irvin, when I went to eventually moved out of the batch plant into quality control, and Irvin taught me how to break cylinders and run gradations. So Irvin was working in quality control, but I was going through the plant count. Chambly was 1, Glenwood 2, Lithonia was 3, Red Oak was 4, Smyrna was 5, Norcross was 6. That's where I was.
I'm just, as you're talking, I was thinking back to my visit with Tim Christian, and did he not say that at the peak of Williams Brothers before Blue Circle, did he say 49 plants total? Does that sound right? And over 90 salesmen?
Could be. I left to move to Tampa, Florida in '79.
Oh, okay.
And I think at that time there were about 30.
Okay.
So that wouldn't surprise me. And I know in the '80s the peak yardage was over 3 million.
Yes.
Doing over 3 million yards.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. While I was at Norcross, I got to know a guy named Randy Turpin.
Yeah.
And you may not have ever
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah, Randy's been in the business for forever. His last position, he was at U.S. Concrete. But he's kind of like, we call him the professor. He was just expert. In fact, he taught me very quickly, basically how to design mixes and proportion them, and he had everything in his head. And he was an inventor. But I started out as one of his field techs, and Randy believed in putting quality control people on job sites, and that was what he needed me to do. So I got exposed to projects pretty quickly. I mean, I was young, and working for Randy. Randy left not too long after I started working for him, probably a couple of years after I started in quality control. One of the largest projects ever sold in Atlanta had 100,000 yards in it. It was the Hilton Hotel.
Wow. Which
is down on Cortlandt Street.
Yeah. And
Williams Brothers had that job, and Randy he did consulting for our Hardin company, and he helped them set up a batch plant for that job, and he took that job from Williams Brothers. I mean, it was not they were not
Ooh.
happy at the.
Woo.
So yeah, he grabbed that job, and but our lab was at Glenwood, and yeah, and I enjoyed working for Randy. He was a master delegator, we called him. He knew how to delegate everything. He'd come up with an idea, and then he was good at getting it accomplished. But I handled all the mix designs after Randy left. I did all the mix submittals, and back then, a mixed submittal was nothing but a mix.
Yes.
And it's not like today. Today, it's it's incredible the requirements for concrete mixes. But a lady named Beverly Palmer, I have to mention her. Beverly absolutely kept the sales department glued together and processed bid for contractors. She the quotes, and then she just worked hard. She's what I call, like Russell, she's an unsung hero.
Yes.
There's so many of them in our business, and then Harold Williams was vice president of sales. There was John and Horace were brothers. Harold was a cousin, not one of the brothers. And then the sales manager, who Beverly worked for, was Bob Williams, commercial. So he was not related.
His name was Williams, but he wasn't.
His name was Williams, but he wasn't Horace and John Williams. But he oversaw the commercial sales group. A great man, and a good mentor to me. He taught me a lot. But the company, I just put a note here to remind myself, the company was actually founded in 1922, and it was just a lumber and hardware store there in East Atlanta. The founder's name was H.R. Williams, just like Horace.
Right.
But John and Horace ended up running everything. But I met the Mr. H.R., the founder. He was sort of like Miss Daisy. He had a driver that drove him around and took him to all the locations, and he happened to stop at Norcross one time. So he was an interesting man. And I'm glad I had that opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, because he had started really an empire. So John and Horace were the second generation. So
when did you leave and go to Florida? What was
79?
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I will. I've made me a note here, make sure I don't forget anything. But that kind of dovetailed with. Hang on just a second. That leaving, I was, one of my values is with loyalty.
Yes.
I think loyalty to a company is very important, and I think the people that actually own companies truly value loyalty, and that's what that you're trying to build in your employees is loyalty. You treat employees well, and I was always treated well, but there was a period of time there that I had a little beef with Horace. We had a strike one year. Teamsters 525 tried to organize the drivers.
Right.
And of all things, they decided to strike in November. And that's really, you don't need as many drivers in November for one thing, but that's holiday season. I couldn't believe it. But some of us in the management team decided we would drive a truck during the strike. And of course, I didn't have a commercial license, but I knew how to drive a concrete truck.
Yeah.
I learned that up at Norcross. So anyway, I drove a truck, and I was out on the job site one day and pouring concrete into a bucket, crane and bucket at Western Electric. And the guy that was running the bucket, he said, "You're not a regular driver, are you?" How can you tell?
How could you tell?
I said, you're too clean
That's
cut.
right. That's right.
I said, so I decided I was going to grow a beard. And I didn't know it at the time, but Horace did not like beards.
Right.
He did not want his employees to have facial hair.
Right.
And so he didn't say anything about it until the strike was over. But anyway, I kind of, I didn't want to shave at all. So I kept that beard, and Horace would not talk to me, really.
Oh, my.
He kind of ignored me. And finally, he told Donnie to tell me I had to shave my beard. So I shaved the beard off, and I said, well, I'm just going to find another job. So I was mad. But anyway, one of the Admix salesmen told me about opening in Tampa with a company called Florida Mining and Materials.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I called him up, and talked to a guy named Jack Roebuck. And I don't know if you know Jack, but Jack could sell anything. He was just a great guy. He was a industrial engineering graduate. He attended Georgia Tech, and then he graduated from Florida. And but Jack hired me, and Cheryl and I moved to Tampa. Her daddy didn't think we'd like it, but we really enjoyed Tampa, and I didn't realize Tampa was South Florida.
Right.
So it is South Florida. Anything below,
Oh, yeah.
I think it's I-4, it's called South Florida. It was hot and humid.
That was in, you said 79?
79.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jack was a good boss. Cheryl and I had not had any children at that time, and Jack kept on us. We would go to their house for dinner. We'd invite them to our house for dinner, and Jack kept on me. He said, you need to start your family. So we had our daughter Amy while we were in Tampa, and so we enjoyed our time down there. But after about the first few seasons, winters were very definite. We had some record cold.
Yeah.
And then, like, starting about the fifth year, it just stayed hot almost the whole year round. I said, Cheryl, I think I've had enough of this hot weather. And Randy Turpin, mentioned his name earlier.
Yeah,
Randy was back at Williams Brothers in Blue Circle.
They let him back after he robbed him?
Well, it was Blue Circle. It was different.
Okay.
It had changed to Blue Circle. Yeah. So Randy, he and I talked, and I made my way back, and Blue Circle was very helpful in getting us moved back, helped us with our double house payments.
What year, roughly?
That was 89.
89.
10 years later.
10 years later.
Yeah,
okay.
10 years.
And you're coming back with a little girl?
Came back with a daughter, yep. And
Tim was there, right? Well, no, was Tim?
This was after Tim.
Tim had left.
Blue Circle president then was John Bordeaux.
Okay.
John Bordeaux, we knew his wife was a Revlon heir.
Huh.
So probably John didn't have to work. But when I got there, most companies have like a 5-year plan. So, we're back at Blue Circle, and it was unbelievable. We had, in quality control, we had over 30 employees. It was unbelievable. Back at Williams Brothers, before I left, one of the things I did was started the Admix operation. And Tony Cantrell told you about the Admixes.
Yeah, he did.
Tony followed me.
Okay.
When I left, it kind of left them without a person to run the Admix. So Tony, by a miracle, came along with a degree in chemistry.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. And so, yay, Tony, because I did not enjoy that part of the business. But anyway, what happened around 1989 was that Admix plant caught on fire. It was a cylinder capping pot of sulfur that somebody left it on over the weekend, and it burned the building, burned the whole thing down. and it was a big deal. You know, they had
Oh
the
yeah.
fire department out there with a chemical. They thought it was a chemical fire. So, but anyway, they took the insurance money from that fire and built a really nice lab. Had a huge compression machine, and one of the people that had worked at Williams Brothers, Dennis Upchurch. And I don't know if you ever crossed
Yeah,
paths
I
with
remember
Dennis.
Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis had gone into batch plant construction
Yes.
and buildings and so forth. And Dennis actually built that lab. We had a environmental room in it. We could set that temperature wherever, at low or high, and humidity. We could control the humidity, and so we could run all kind of variations of mix designs and see how they perform. So the lab was just a huge part of that. So anyway, that when I came back, you know, it was a completely different scene, big operation, and I had run the QA operation in Florida for Florida Mining and Materials. So I ran it with basically three main people for the whole state of Florida. So when I came back to Atlanta, I mean, I had this huge. We had about 3 or 4 people that worked on mix designs.
Wow.
Because the company was so big.
Yes.
Had a group doing that, and Terry Vines, you know Terry. Terry did all the mix designs and the submittals, and between he and I, we kind of coordinated what went on into the lab. So did a whole bunch of research. But one of the engineers I got to know in the 70s was Tamer Usen. Company now is using in Case.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew Tamer when he was with Harold Nielsen back in the 70s, and we became friends. And we developed. He needed some 7,500 psi concrete back in 1976, and we came up with a mix for him, and we made about over 9,000 psi.
That was a big deal back then,
so yeah,
wasn't it?
Because before that, 5,000 was a high strength. But when I got back to Blue Circle there, we did a project called One Peachtree, and we did it had 12,000 psi in it. So. And actually, we made 15,000 out in the field. It's, unbelievable. That's the tower that John Portman's last signature project in downtown Atlanta. It's now called the Truist Tower, but we got them a cover story in Concrete International. I co-authored an article with one of the engineers. Portman's engineer at that time was a guy named Hoosh Rahimzadi. And in fact, after that project, Portman was bidding a project in Kuala Lumpur, and I would have been on the team with them. They didn't get the job, but that would have been so much fun. I forget what the project. It's Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. Somebody else got it, but so I missed that opportunity. But Terry Vines and I, and along with a guy that ran the lab, Dan Morgan, we developed all those mixes, and we had 0 low breaks. I don't remember how many yards of 10 and 12,000 was in it, but we saved Portman over $1 million by providing that high strength concrete. So, and since then, 10 and 12,000 is pretty much off the shelf. And some of the changes I'd say that I've seen through the years, the biggest one is concrete pumps.
Yes.
I remember back in the 70s, we hated the pump because it always meant problems. And today, concrete pumps would just about pump whatever you put in the hopper. So it's incredible. Cranes, most of your big projects have two cranes, and that speeds the project up dramatically. the cranes. And then my using and case friends do a lot of post-tension concrete, which you see companies like Brassfield and Gorey and others that they live and die off post-tension concrete. They need a 3-day break, sometimes a 2-day break, to tension the cables in the floors.
Can you take a quick moment? Don't want to. I know you could talk at length about it, but for our listeners, just a brief explanation of post tension, what it is and why would that be employed?
Yeah, post tensioning helps eliminate some of the columns in the building. Post tensioning is the placement of cables in the floor slab before the concrete is poured. And then once the concrete is poured, it has to gain strength up to like 3,500 psi. And then a subcontractor will tension those cables, put stress on them. And then that's why it's called post-tension. You tension afterwards. So the idea is with fewer columns, you have more rentable, leasable space. You got more open space to rent. And the strength, talk about columns, we can make up to 12,000 psi columns, and columns will vary strength from the bottom floor up to the top. You may have 10,000 psi at the bottom, and then you may have 6,000 on the top floors. And the reason you do that is so the columns are all the same size. You standardize the formwork, and the contractor, that's what he makes money at, is repetitious operations, doing the same thing over and over. So that really speeds the building up and also makes it easier on the contractor. The other thing I've noticed, this I think started back in the 90s, was the scheduling of work. It got to where we didn't say no to a contractor anymore. When do you want your concrete?
Yes,
sir, we can do that. And so 724 schedules. Concrete, instead of being that 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. that when I got into it, Monday through Friday, it's 724. And that was really, to me, as I got older.
That's a big change. That's a very big change.
As I got older, that really was, it was harder to do those early morning pours. But
you've really seen in your, let's see, how long? 71, you were part-time, 50. So what is that? 54, 55 years you've been around this industry and seen punch cards to the modern batch computer and testing sophistication has certainly made big advances in admixtures. Why not, let's just for a moment, let me ask you, what would you say are let's say the top 2 or 3 most significant admixture related improvements, enhancements? You know what I'm saying? In other words, you can do a million, so much with admixtures, but just looking back, what were the big admixture breakthroughs, for the lack of a better term? What do you think?
Yeah, I may get the names wrong on the admixtures, but when we started with the first Super Ps that I used were naphthalines.
Yes.
And those are the ones you just about had to add them on the job site.
Right.
It was terrible. I remember when I came back to Blue Circle in '89, first thing I did was have them equip some of the mixers with a dispenser because we just weren't doing Super P very well. And that was a cumbersome way, to deal with them because you had to have the right dose, et cetera. Now, then we moved to adding them by person with a dispenser on the job site.
Yeah.
Still, you're wasting manpower
Yep.
with that, but it was certainly a lot better because you could vary the dosage and save a little on the expense. And then it evolved to what's today some very good products that you can add them at the batch plant.
Yes.
And you can adjust the dosage for how long you want them to hold. You recall I worked for Walker Concrete.
Yes.
For Joe Dickinson.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a project that they were pumping the concrete in a tunnel underground, 3,000 feet. And so not only did we use the latest version of the Super P that had incredible life to it.
Now, is that the polycarboxylate? Is that
polycarboxylate? Yeah, right. And we also used a hydration stabilizer. And so that concrete, basically, we could predict how long it would be before the concrete set. And then the contractor at a certain point could pop the forms and move them. And I think he had to have about 1,200 PSI or something like that. It wasn't a critical high strength. But contractors can do so much more with the admixtures. You've got admixtures for pouring concrete underwater that hold the mix together, things like that. So the admix companies have evolved so much. They've made the job for the ready mix people so much easier.
Let me ask you, changing gears a little bit from looking backward to looking ahead. And my question would be, looking ahead, what do you see that we're facing here in Georgia as a ready mix industry that concerns you, or the big challenges, whether it's with the manufacturing of concrete, with just anything that you observe or notice about the industry and the big challenges in front of us? What do you say?
Yeah, I would say it's the same as in general construction, is the manpower.
Right.
And I guess you'd say HR, attracting workers to the workforce. I did after I left Walker, I worked for a testing and inspection company as their consultant, and working on a project. I remember one day I was watching a concrete pour, and every truckload of concrete we got had a driver and a driver trainer. It was unbelievable. And I cautioned the driver. I said, stay away from, we had in downtown Atlanta, you have granite curbs.
Right.
And those granite curbs are sharp.
Yes.
I said, stay off the curb. Don't get up against that curb. And the driver apparently didn't know what I meant, and drove and got up against that curb, and it ruined a tire.
Yes.
Ruined a tire. And so that's what you got when you have rookies.
Yes.
But I'd say getting CDLs, the industry now competes with so much over the road CDL demand that it's just hard. And it started back, I would say, in 2008, when it really went off the cliff with so many drivers lost their jobs.
Yes.
You couldn't give concrete away in 2008, 2009, and so those drivers had to
go elsewhere.
Work. So you lost a huge amount of truck drivers to other industries. Can't get them back. So.
What about on the product side and the materials? Any comments on challenges going forward? And of course, in our meeting that we just concluded here, we were of course talking about the pressure of sustainability and the push to take out cement and different pozzolans that are coming along. Any comments around looking down the road relative to the manufacturing process, raw
Yeah,
materials?
yeah, the business is becoming so complex in terms of mixed designs and materials and the chase for sustainability and uh, lowering global warming potential. And what you're going to have is you're going to have technologies that are introduced in the market that the ready mix producer is supposed to be expert on the subject. And we were just talking about
Yes,
that,
yes,
expert on the subject. And those technologies are going to interfere with your customer's
yes,
schedule because of the strength development, perhaps durability, things like that. Uh, all this sustainability push goes just the opposite of the durability push with water cement ratio. We've been required to add more and more cement to our mixes to chase lower water cement ratios for I don't know how long, for 30, 40 years. And now we're saying we need to be more sustainable. And the cement industry can only do so much with a 1L cement. I mean, that they've got to come up with other blended cement variations, either blending fly ash or slagged with type 1 or 1L, things like that to
yes.
satisfy this demand.
And it's interesting, Roy, as you're talking, it's occurring to me maybe more than it has been, but particularly leaving our last meeting when we were discussing how ultimately it seems like the ready mix producers is always the lightning rod. They're always responsible for, regardless of specifications, regardless of field testing, et
Right.
cetera. At the end of the day, we answer for concrete and often the placement of the concrete. And
Yeah.
now we're answering for a lot of changes in the ingredients, in the raw materials, whether it's 1L, other pozzolans, what have you. I guess what I'm getting at is back to my question, what are we facing? I think we're facing some significant challenges of potentially a product liability and when all, does that make sense? You know what
Yeah,
I'm
and
getting
this
at?
is where you and the association play a huge role in the sharing of knowledge that benefits the industry. Uh, I've worked for small companies. I work for large companies. Large companies are able to send some of their people to meetings, national meetings, and get educated. And then somehow you've got to bring all that knowledge into the marketplace. And that's what your role is. That's how you can benefit concrete companies, whether they've got 2 plants, 20 trucks, or whether they've got 300 or 400.
Yes,
So you can bring everybody into the room to talk,
yes.
and that's why your role is so important in Georgia.
Well, we didn't design this segue, but it's a perfect segue for me to ask Roy to expound a little bit, if you would, on that idea of the Georgia Ready Mix Concrete Association, the value, what we do, what benefit is the association to our members. We don't do this for free. There are dues that are paid. There's time commitments. There's volunteer efforts. You're a volunteer. You came to
Yeah,
a committee meeting today. You're not paid to necessarily per se to come. It takes you away from your work. So my question, would be, say some more about the ways over the years that you've seen the value to its members of the association.
sure. Well, it's not just a social organization. It is beneficial in getting people together in a legal way that you can talk and socialize, and have more respect for your competitor. We have, uh, I've heard people disparage their competition, but really everybody's just trying to earn a living at the end of the day, and uh, you don't want to be enemies in the marketplace. You want to treat each other with respect. So I would say the number one thing is that you learn how to treat each other with respect. I just I don't know that I need to say more than
No,
that.
that's a great point that
Number
isn't
one.
often, that's honestly, I don't hear that uh,
Yeah,
point very often, but in reality, it's very significant.
yeah,
That's the basis for the relationship that allows you then to collaborate if you're dealing with weight laws or some cement issue or testing or
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it may be. You come into a room
yeah.
and you're not at loggerheads.
Right.
Yeah,
And you, I would just say you do a great job of the social interaction, promoting it. Just really respect you for your ability to bring people together and so forth.
thank you.
Emily, it's a very important job.
Yes,
You have got to be at the Capitol. Somebody has got to be there representing your industry. That bill that they got through, I don't, I didn't hear
talking about
the whole story.
fortified, right? Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. We didn't hear the story on that, but uh, when, back in 2002, we got the weight law amended, and that was an incredible effort. So for you to get legislation on your behalf done, that is an incredible job. That doesn't, you got to get a whole bunch of people lined up, nodding their heads at the same time. And I would say an unsung hero in that weight law back in '02 was Chris
Chris
Davis.
Davis,
Chris Davis.
absolutely.
Chris,
Yep.
I'd never worked that closely around Chris, but Chris, if I wasn't down at the Capitol, or at least close to it at 7 a.m., Chris was calling me on the phone, wanting to know where I was. So
Right.
I admire Richard. I don't know. Richard probably had something to do with it, but
Yep.
and others like Doug Walker.
Absolutely.
Doug was very close with Lynn Westmoreland, who was the minority leader. Chris had lined up Tom Murphy, and the chairman of the House Transportation Committee. I can't remember his name, but all of those people spoke in favor of our bill. They spoke from the well, it's called,
Yes.
down on the floor. And to get that to happen, it was incredible. But that was just, what Emily does is just invaluable. So
It is, and the impact on our members can, as you well know, whether it's hours of service, whether it's the weight law, which is significant on our
sure,
profitability and our
sure,
financial health. Or now we're facing the sunset of the mixer sales tax exemption, which we're optimistic about it, but as you point out, it's never a done deal until you
right,
get down there and get to work. So
yep,
that's something that we do as an association on behalf of all producers, whether they're members or not.
yep,
And certainly we like to see all of our producers part of the association because we need everybody's help, don't you think? I mean, we need everyone involved
yep,
because
you do,
it may be that there are producers in different parts of the state that do have they have relationships that have some measure of influence,
yeah.
and the more that we bring to bear.
Well, I don't. Every member that of this organization represents a huge number of people who vote. So when you go before the legislature, these representatives and senators look at you and they know that you represent large blocks of voters. So that's part of the power you have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Roy, I'll tell you what I'm feeling right now. It's funny. I get this feeling often in these interviews that we could literally, let's see, what time is it? 2:15, and we could probably carry on the rest of the afternoon without breaking a sweat. But I tell you what, I'm trying to think. I would say I would like to ask one more question. I could ask a lot more, but um, what advice? I always like to hear this. What advice you've been through? You've been in this business for many years, and um, clearly you've learned a lot. You've been in leadership roles, in largely technical, but in all parts of the operation. Um, there's some pearls of wisdom, uh, counsel, advice to people coming in, to leadership in this industry, young leaders. What would you advise them about how to be successful in our industry in this day and age?
Yeah, I would say the first assignment would be listen to all these uh, YouTube
Podcast.
podcasts that you've done. I especially enjoyed the one David Grayson and then David's brother-in-law John Tuggle did. Two guys that totally dropped in on the concrete industry, sort of like I did, and they have been so successful at what they do. And I admire both of them. So listening to the podcast, listening especially to David and John, uh, the professional development. I thank Jack Roebuck, who I work for in Florida, for getting me into ACI and then getting me active in these organizations. But professional development, where you know your product, uh, best practices, you know how to deal with problems, because they say you don't need if you have no problems, you don't need a manager, right? Man, that's all managers do is solve problems. So if you desire that management role, uh, you need to know how to, a lot of things like the product and also how to deal with people. Because people are pretty delicate too. You got to treat them well, respect them. Uh, I talked about Teamsters 525 trying to organize Williams Brothers, and the lawyer came to us and said, "If you get a union, you deserved a union. If your employees vote a union in, it's because you deserved it." So you got to treat people well, treat them fairly, and then just I would say young people look for opportunities to grow in your abilities to manage. Uh, and I would say at Florida Mining and Materials, we had a consultant came to work for us, a guy named Ed Pittman. And Ed taught a lot of classes on managing, how to deal with people, how to keep things going right, and then what to do when things go wrong. So um,
Well, those are great points, and um, you know, becoming knowledgeable. I mean, it seems like common sense that you learn the product if you're going to be in the business, and as others have said, it's so valuable to learn the different aspects of ready mix, and whether it's billing, whether it's batching, being in a mixer. I learn more when I jump in a mixer
oh
and
yeah,
and go to it didn't matter if it was residential or commercial or DOT. Every time I jumped in a mixer, I learned a lot. And if I wanted to really hold up a mirror to our business and look at ourselves in the mirror, it's getting in a mixer and engaging the CDP, the driver, and you'll learn a lot
yeah,
about. And you may not like what you hear,
yeah.
but Roy, thank you so much for taking time and sharing your incredible story. It's helped me tremendously, as all of these interviews do, because our industry it really is a fascinating industry. It's a significant. We couldn't have the growth, the community growth without concrete. That's the
Yeah.
that's the thing that's so exciting about our product. It's very, what do you replace it with? It's
Right.
There's no equal that we know of today, at least. But I do appreciate your time and contributing to this project, and I certainly I wish you well, my friend. I wish
All
you
right.
the best.
Well, I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.